Our lunch speaker is both an author and vivid storyteller. His book, The Bodybuilders, explores the current revolution in human augmentation, which is helping us triumph over the limitations and constraints we have long accepted as an inevitable part of being human. Please welcome Mr. Adam Piore.
Hello, thanks for having me. My name is Adam Piore, and I'm glad to be here. I'm here to talk a little bit about my book, which is called The Bodybuilders, Inside the Science of the Engineered Human, and some of the trends that I reviewed. It's funny to be here because I left DC. I used to cover, I'm a journalist. I used to cover Capitol Hill about 20 years ago. I left and said I was never coming back. It actually relates because I covered Congress for a newspaper in New Jersey, and I left in the middle of the Monica Lewinsky scandal. My job was to stand off the House floor and ask every congressman what they thought of the day's news. So I quit my job and I went about as far away as I could go, and I moved to the country of Cambodia. And I spent a year and a half there reporting on events there, and it was an amazing experience. The country was emerging from 30 years of civil war, from a genocide in which 1 in 4 people died of murder, starvation, and disease. And what really struck me while I was there was this theme of human resilience. And it was a very valuable experience after. I mean, DC, there's a lot of data here and a lot of information, but to be seeing people's lives and how they bounce back, and sort of changed the way I looked at journalism and what I wanted to do. And when I came back, I wanted to write more about the theme of human resilience. And I found that in the United States, some of the most exciting stories of human resilience are being unleashed by technology. And that's really what my book is about. My book is about a field called bioengineering, which I'm sure some of you have heard about. And I guess my presentation here is less data-driven than some of the stuff, but I just wanted to what I tried to do was put some of these trends that we keep hearing about in the news into context, and some of these, fields like bionics, regenerative medicine, genetic engineering, brain-computer interfaces. That's what I really focused on in my book here. I'll put it right here. It's a little bionic Vitruvian man there. Got a little creative. What all these things have in common is we've sort of reached a tipping point. In the last century, some of the most talented engineers, we did incredible engineering feats. We went to the moon, we built skyscrapers, we mastered flight. And sort of my argument and what I've seen in the last 10 years of sort of covering this beat for science magazines like the MIT Technology Review, Scientific American, Popular Science, is that the new frontier now is some of the most talented engineers are turning their sights inward into the human body. And we've always tried to do that, but now many of the technologies that we've heard about here, sensing and computing technologies, are allowing us to do things that we could never really do before, to reverse engineer the human body and mind at a level that would have been impossible just a few years ago. So that's what I tried to explore, and these are trends we've heard a lot about, and I'm a journalist, so I went out and I tried to talk to people and find out if this was really going on, what we're learning about where our limits lie and how we might overcome them, and how this was actually affecting people's lives. And so I think it's pretty obvious this is going to be a tremendous area of growth in the next century. You guys are the ones who can figure out how to monetize it. Various different areas are coming along at different paces. But I'll tell you that the first person that I wrote about and the first person I talked to sort of demonstrates one area where already there's progress that can be commercialized. And that person is he was a man named Hugh Herr. And I'll just tell you a little bit about him since it's lunch, and I like to tell stories. This guy, Hugh Herr, this was a great story of human resilience. This guy was he was not the best student in high school. He was a C and D student, but he loved to rock climb. And he was already, as a teenager, kind of a world-famous rock climber. He'd been on some rock climbing magazines as a young prodigy, and all he did in class was think about rock climbing. And one day he went hiking in Mount Washington in New Hampshire with his friend. They ice climbed. They got to the top of a mountain. the wind shifted and they were in the middle of a blizzard and they went down the wrong way and they descended into the wilderness. And they wandered into the wilderness and they got lost and they almost died. And they were rescued on the brink of death. And Hugh had severe frostbite and both his legs were amputated below the knee. And so the doctors told him he'd never walk, he'd never run, he'd never climb again. And every night he would go to sleep and he would dream that he was running through the cornfields behind his parents' house with the wind running through his hair, and then he'd wake up and he'd see his legs were gone, and it was devastating. But soon he was tired of being in bed, so he scooted out of bed, he started climbing around. He realized he could pull himself up on the refrigerator, he had all this arm strength. He convinced his brothers to take him rock climbing. And on the rock wall, he was able to, he was even lighter than he was before. So he began tinkering with his prosthetics. He made them 7 feet long. He made them little stumps with blades so he could climb these areas that he couldn't climb before. And soon he was an even better climber than he'd ever been before. And he was on 60 Minutes, and he was kind of world famous again. And it was this inspirational story of this boy wonder. But when he got down, his prosthetics were, they were no better than the peg leg that had been designed for Civil War soldiers or pirates a couple hundred years ago. So he began tinkering with them, and he began enrolling in engineering and math classes, and he became a straight A student. And he got accepted into MIT. And today he's one of the leading bionics engineers in the world. And what he has done is he has taken these technologies that I'm talking about that are driving this revolution, which are computing and sensing technologies, and he's used them to make bionic limbs that are so similar to the real thing that when I went to go visit him at MIT, I couldn't even tell he was wearing them. We were walking across an icy quad and I was slipping, and he was wearing fancy Italian leather shoes, and I couldn't, and what he did is, and this is sort of what we'll see more and more of it at greater resolutions. But when you think about it, let's see, I wrote down this number here. We have, how many? We have 206 bones, 360 joints, 700 muscles, and about 4,000 tendons, right? And a small portion of those are on our legs. So what he did is he took able-bodied individuals, used the same kind of motion capture technologies that you see for EA Sports or Avatar or any of those movies, and he had them walk, and he recorded how the constituent parts of the leg move in relation to one another. So he could tell, when your ankle's at this angle and your knee is here and you're moving down at this depth, what happens to your foot. And he was able to take these variables and put them into a computer algorithm, and he put them on a computer chip. And then he built robotic parts that can emulate the real thing. Now, it's a manageable number when you think about it. It's 206 bones, 306 joints, however many different parts. But it's still beyond our capacity to figure out by hand. But when you think about the advances in computing power and sensing power just in recent years, it suddenly becomes a manageable problem. And so he built robotic parts out of silicone and various things. And this device that he's made adjusts, hundreds of times a second. And he's done tests on treadmills with oxygen and CO2 and force plates to see, and it really does emulate the real thing. It feels so realistic that disabled people often, when they try it out, they begin to cry because it feels so real. There's a long way to go. You have to hook it up to the nervous system if you want to do the real thing. But that's just an example of what we can do. Now, when you take that further, and that's what I wanted to look at in my book. All the different areas that we hear about have to do with reverse engineering and doing the same thing, except on a much greater level. So let's see, how many neurons do we have? I think we have like 300 billion, I guess, and maybe 3 billion nucleotides in our genome. We don't have the computational power yet to reverse engineer that. But it's amazing, but people are trying to do that to a certain extent, and it's amazing how far we have come in some of these areas. So when you think about, genetic engineering is, that's one area. There's some mutations that are caused by a single some conditions that are caused by a single mutation. And I looked at one of them. I mean, there's a negative regulator of muscle growth called myostatin, and it's a protein. And if you knock out that gene, you get bigger muscles. So there's somebody who was at the University of Pennsylvania. He's moved to Florida, named Lee Sweeney, and he made these things called the press called them Arnold Schwarzenegger mice. He knocked out myostatin, and they got really big. So they've been using this as a potential therapy for people with Duchenne's muscular dystrophy, whose muscles rip themselves apart. But then, of course, gene dopers have got a hold of this, and meatheads are getting ripped. And so Lee Sweeney, in addition to pushing this and trying to push things into trial, is also a member of the World Anti-Doping Authority. So that's sort of an example of the problems we'll face. But when you look at something like intelligence, some people, there's thousands of genes that can be involved and a combination with environment, and we don't necessarily have the computational power yet. There's a company in China called BGI, and they have sequenced about 1,000 people with high intelligence and have been trying to get to the bottom of it. And but they're using supercomputers, but it's only going to get easier as these technologies improve. So that's one example of where we are in that. And then in terms of the brain, I mean, I looked at the most extreme example is trying to understand and decode imagined speech. So there's people who, it seems like the ultimate challenge to me. There's people who are locked in, who have Lou Gehrig's disease and have lost their ability to speak. And so there's a project that was funded by the U.S. military. There was a guy at the Army Research Office who was a science fiction fan when he was growing up, and he had always dreamed of a thought helmet. So he actually funded people. And one of the people, I forget, there's somebody here from Washington University, right? Yeah, right, Eric Luthor. I wrote about him. He's in the MIT Technology Review this month, and I watched him do brain surgery. But him and a collaborator named Gerwin Schalk, they have discovered an actual neural signature of imagined speech. And what they found is that when we talk, our mind sends a signal to the motor cortex to tell the muscles of our articulators how to talk. But it also sends a copy to the auditory cortex as an error correction mechanism, so we know when something's wrong. And amazingly enough, when we just imagine speaking, it still sends that signal there. And you can actually pick up that signal. So Eric Luthor of Washington University and Gerwin Schalk of Albany Wadsworth Institute can actually tell if somebody is imagining reciting the Gettysburg Address or the Martin Luther King "I Have a Dream" speech. But they can't, listen on your thoughts and just decode it yet altogether. But you can imagine that once we have computational power to monitor 100 million, 300 million neurons, maybe something like that would be possible. So anyways, as you can imagine, there's all sorts of areas where there's potential growth in the future. And that's what I explored. And there's all sorts of ethical issues as well. I asked somebody at Beijing Genomics Institute, I said, well, what do you think about, should we really be able to tweak intelligence? And he said, well, I think every parent should be able to have their child be as intelligent as they want. And I thought, well, is there anything that would alarm you? And he said, well, I can imagine a very aggressive tiger mom who wants to engineer her child with perfect combination of intelligence and ruthlessness, and she gives him antisocial lack of empathy. And so that was a little alarming to think about. So I don't know, we're going to have to grapple with these issues, and there's no easy answers. As I asked a military scientist, are these good technologies or bad technologies? And he said, it depends. Is a baseball bat a good thing or a bad thing? It's a good thing if we use it to play baseball with. It's a bad thing if we use it to beat somebody over the head with. So these are issues that we're going to have to deal with. And in terms of commercialization, it depends on, it's just going to increase our level of specificity. The kind of, what we rely on now, we rely on small molecule drugs, and we systemically alter the molecules in all of our body. And we're going to be able to get more and more specific as these technologies improve. I also wrote about a technology where they're actually trying to stimulate neurons directly with electricity, which is much more robust. But we're a long ways away from this. So anyways, that is talk. And happy to answer questions. And thank you. Did anyone want to ask questions or?
I have a question. This is fabulous. What, in your lifetime, do you think we will really be able to? Oh, sorry. In your lifetime, do you think we will have solved the most complex, dangerous brain cancers, glioblastomas?
Yeah, well, I don't know, but I have seen many encouraging things. I mean, one thing that's going on you probably heard of is immunotherapy. And somebody was just telling me last night, at Argonne National Laboratory in Lawrence Livermore, they're using supercomputers to look at cancer and look at some of the data sets from veterans. As we have big data, we can discover some of these things. I have been down to a place called MD Anderson in Houston, and they've set up this platform where they're looking at sort of there's an interesting battle that goes on between different cancerous tumors and the immune system. I don't know if anyone has heard of these things called checkpoint inhibitors. They're what saved Jimmy Carter's life. And basically, there's these switches in the immune system that can be turned on and off. And some cancers are able to flip a switch that turns off different components of the immune system. And at MD Anderson, they're learning to flip it back on. So in glioblastoma, I'm not sure what goes on in that. I mean, it seems a very effective way to fight cancer would be to harness the body's own immune system. But I do not know specifically where they are in that.
Thinking about how you suggested a mother might choose particular traits for her child, it sort of raises the nature versus nurture argument from a different perspective. But presumably, the child would still be limited by the genetic material that they had to work with.
Right. Well, but I mean, I guess the idea that BGI is going by, or that people are talking about, is if you understand the genetic code and what combination of nucleotides would predispose someone to superior intelligence, then you could use something like CRISPR and the various gene editing technologies that people are developing to rewrite the genome, to give them that combination of genes, that genetic code that would allow them to be the most intelligent. But I guess what I'm saying is there's so many variables involved, and it's so complicated. It's such a complex combination between different nucleotides and environment that I think we're a long way from decoding exactly what will allow us to control intelligence.
Let me just add a little complexity to that. We thought as biologists, when the Human Genome Project was complete, we'd understand this. Turns out that, as most of you know, each gene codes ultimately for a peptide or a protein. And so if you know how many genes you have, you should be able to match those to the number of peptides. Well, it turns out there's several-fold multiplication in the diversity from the genome. So just by gene editing won't get you that. The other complexity here is if you take two identical twins, humans, some of you may be aware their fingerprints are actually different. So even though they have exactly the same genome, their phenotype has been modified in their embryonic development, let alone the nurture once they're born. So simply thinking that if we can identify the gene, splice it, put something else in, and result in a final human being that's going to have those traits is far from the reality. Nature has levels of complexity. I'm just giving you some examples that aren't going to simply let us. It's not just one gene, one trait, even when we think that's the case. So,
on the other hand, there are some. I mean, genetics in some ways revolutionizing pharmaceuticals or certain companies. There's Regeneron is a company that has partnered with all sorts of academics who are looking and studying different populations that have rare mutations with a powerful effect. And there's also Amgen has bought this company in Iceland called Decode, which they've tried to, because the Icelandic population is so homogeneous, if they've collected a lot of the DNA from a lot of these individuals, and it's easier to spot very powerful mutations that are associated with different diseases or that could predispose you. But usually it's a combination of a lot of things. And they, like, for instance, I think one of the reasons Amgen bought Decode was because they had found in elderly patients a mutation that seemed to make it harder for them to get Alzheimer's disease. And it didn't explain Alzheimer's disease, but apparently it made it harder for them to form the plaques and tangles that actually cause it. And so if you could replicate that with a small molecule drug, you could presumably combat Alzheimer's. But you couldn't give somebody intelligence necessarily.
Adam, as you went around the world and talked to people, did you notice a difference from an ethical perspective in sort of intellectual augmentation versus physical augmentation?
I don't know. I mean, it seems like I've read, there's some studies from I think scientific journals that many people in academic already try to intellectually augment themselves with, Ritalin or Provigil or all sorts of stuff, and I don't know what it's like in college nowadays, but yeah, but I have actually, and I mean, you can see the same thing that happened with steroids is happening with some of these gene things like myostatin. As soon as they get discovered in the scientific literature and they're used to help the weakest among us, steroids were originally used for muscle wasting disease, and people who were survivors of the Holocaust, athletes start using them. And recently I wrote about somebody for Business Week, a guy at UC San Diego and the Salk Institute named James Evans, and he's actually found a mutation that he's found these receptors that if you tweak them, they can allow a mouse to run twice as far as he normally would. It's like this fat burning switch. So if you administer this drug, the body starts to burn more glucose, and you delay the point at which the mouse hits the wall. And they called these mice marathon mice. And when he first published a paper about a drug that did this in 2008, he gave a copy of a reference sample to the World Anti-Doping Authority, and I think they found samples on the Tour de France within like 3 weeks, And but then the World Anti-Doping Authority was so alarmed that they put out a notice warning that the trials had been stopped because they had been found to cause cancerous tumors in mice. So that helped a little bit, but I still think there's been evidence that the former Soviet Union doping authorities have used this in some places, but recently Evans came out with a new drug that supposedly doesn't have these tumor-causing effects, and you can be sure that it's already being made in China and bought on the black market. So it's hard to control. Okay, thank you.
Our next session is a series of fireside chats and TED-style talks featuring speakers representing a broad cross-section of the private sector who will highlight various disruptive technologies and their impact on the U.S. economy. To moderate this session, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the Executive Vice President for the Council on Competitiveness, Mr. Chad Evans.
Economic growth drivers evolve over time. In the pre-18th century, the main driver of economic growth was cultivation, was extraction. In the 19th and 20th century, the main economic drivers were really manufacturing and industry. As we look forward into the 21st century, building on a manufacturing renaissance and new energy strength, what we see is that compute power-driven innovation coupled with human potential will be the core drivers for future growth. This afternoon's set of conversations over the next 90 minutes will reflect some of this revolution, some of this transformation, as we explore the implications and the impact of big data and data analytics, America's future workforce, its challenges and the opportunities they face, the rise of robotics, autonomous systems, and an increasingly on-demand economy, an increasingly cashless society, new frontiers in medicine and healthcare, and of course, cybersecurity and cyber resilience in an increasingly fragile world. This afternoon's first insights will come from Dr. Keoki Jackson, the Vice President and Chief Technology Officer of Lockheed Martin. Dr. Jackson will share with us some of his thoughts on how the physical and digital world are colliding and converging every day through sensors, networks, and a tsunami of data. Big data is a game changer for generating value and enhancing competitiveness. As a society, we produce today, or actually every 2 days, as much data that was generated from the beginning of time until the beginning of the 21st century. And in just 2 years, the amount of available digital information in the world will rise from 5 to 50 zettabytes. So within this turbulent, data-rich, image-driven, intensive world, companies and organizations are finding ways to seize on opportunities, to expand their horizons and create new businesses, new industries, new markets. I'd like to welcome to the stage now Dr. Jackson, who's going to share some of his insights and some of his perspectives from the aerospace and defense sector.
Thank you, Chad. Well, I'm finding the clicker here. Let me maybe start with a question. We'll do a little show of hands. So how many people got here to the forum some way via commercial airlines? Anyway? So first of all, I'm glad you all made it here safely. But I'm hardly surprised. And the reason is the likelihood of anyone being involved in an accident, any accident, not a fatal accident, it's about 3 in a million. So our airline industry, commercial aviation, has an amazing safety record. And the reason is the industry has been laser focused for many years on finding and fixing every problem, whether it's materials in manufacturing, design, maintenance, ultimately things like pilot training, flight operations. And so if you look at the record over time, you see this incredibly dramatic improvement over many years. So that's the great news. The disappointing part maybe is when you get that good, it's really hard to continue to improve anymore. Or maybe that was the disappointing news, because the reality is when we come up against these kinds of walls, what happens is typically some game changer comes along that creates a whole brand new paradigm. And for our generation, one of those game changers is big data. So let me give you maybe an example here. And I'll start with the S-92 helicopter. So the S-92 is built by Sikorsky, which is one of Lockheed Martin's, it's our helicopter manufacturing division. So the S-92 is already the safest helicopter in the world. So this brings me back to aviation. The S-92 is actually a flying sensor hub. It collects 100 megabytes of data every flight hour. So out there's about over 200 terabytes of data on this airframe, over 1.1 million flight hours. And the volume of that database is increasing with the square of time. So we use that trove of data to do root cause analysis of failures, to monitor performance, whether it's the mechanical or the avionics systems. So when that flight absolutely has to be there, like that example you saw in the video of a baby being airlifted for medical care, it's big data that's making that happen. The Sikorsky sustainment team is looking at this data to be able to predict in advance any kind of a potential component failure long before it ever grounds the aircraft. So practically speaking, now we have predictability in flight hour operations that exceeds 95%. And that's compared to an industry standard of only about 75%. So you can see this is making a real difference. We're not just increasing safety, improving aircraft availability, we're actually driving down maintenance costs and we're increasing profitability. So now take that example more broadly. So big data, this data tsunami, as was said, this is really driving decisions for us as industry leaders about how to increase our performance, to increase safety, ultimately to improve our competitiveness in the global marketplace. And that data, a lot of it's generated now by digital devices on the Internet of Things, is increasing at an exponential rate. And so figuring out as business leaders how to capture the value of that data is ultimately one of the pillars of the fourth industrial revolution. So there was a recent McKinsey Global Institute survey, and they concluded that there's going to be about $11 trillion or more of added economic value due to big data and the Internet of Things. So leading companies are now exploring, how are we going to capture that value for our organizations? And so Lockheed Martin is working on this revolution in many fronts. Maybe one of the exciting things I'll talk to you about today is how we're actually reinventing how we use big data to redesign or design brand new manufacturing facilities. So today, when Lockheed Martin decides to build a factory, we start in virtual reality with modeling and simulation, with data analytics, predictive analytics, and even artificial intelligence. So we build the entire factory in the virtual and digital realm before we ever put a shovel in the ground. We actually simulate years of production flow. We understand how we're going to build the hardware, and we understand what it's going to mean for the resources required. And then when we actually go and build the real factory in the real world, we do the same thing, collect that data, analyze it, and ultimately continue to optimize our production over time, increasing safety, quality, efficiency, reducing resource utilization, again, improving business outcomes. So let me give you an example of that. This is a factory we recently built from the ground up to produce a new military vehicle. So again, you're actually immersed here in what we showed to our customer to demonstrate our production versatility, flexibility, and precision. In the virtual 3D factory, we're using interactive shop floor production flow and assembly sequences to really understand not just our resource requirements, but how to optimize that flow. And so when we look at the assembly line from end to end, we're actually figuring out how to make ourselves impervious to disruption. We're using a combination of proprietary machine learning software. We're using historical data from our existing factories, and then we're using this modeling and simulation to ultimately figure out what our risks are and how to mitigate them, and to focus then on quality and safety. So to understand what this means, this factory that I just showed you, when we went and built that in the real world, we did it flawlessly in less than a year. So I've given you a couple of examples, real world use of big data. How about an example that's out of this world, literally? So we're also using big data to overcome both the challenges and achieve the opportunities in outer space. So think back almost 50 years ago. Apollo, we sent astronauts to the moon. The Apollo guidance computer had 64 kilobytes of memory. It operated at a blistering 43 kilohertz. So when we send astronauts out into deep space on Orion in the future, now that spacecraft generates over 200 terabytes, 2 terabytes, I don't want to exaggerate, 2 terabytes of data every hour. So that's like 10 million times the data rate, the telemetry data rate of Apollo. So our next flight is going to be unmanned, but soon after that, we're going to send astronauts to the moon and ultimately to Mars. The rate, the speed at which we're going to be able to do that, how soon that happens, is going to depend extensively on our ability to use big data to monitor trajectory, speed, altitude, things like tank pressures, battery voltages. So we've created what we call Mach 5 Insight. This is a proprietary big data stack. And what Mach 5 allows us to do, first of all, totally streamlines our ability to analyze all this huge amount of data on the ground. But more importantly, in real time, on the mission, now we can compare all of that data that's being generated to every flight that happened before, to every test that happened on the ground. So now we can find and fix issues before they ever impact the mission. And ultimately, that means bringing our astronauts back home again safely to the ground and to Earth. So like Orion, big data is actually opening up brand new frontiers for us, not just in exploration, but in productivity. And of course, that offers us a choice. How are we going to react to this whole new world of opportunities ahead of us? So maybe let me finish up for you with a question. How are your organizations going to react? Are you going to embrace this big data challenge, disrupt yourselves, lead that revolution? Or are you going to arrive late and struggle to catch up? At Lockheed Martin, mission success is in our DNA. Our mantra is we're inventing or engineering a better tomorrow. So for us, this choice is very stark. It's about whether we're going to continue to increase safety and performance in aviation or live with the status quo. Are we going to build the connected, hyper-efficient factories of the future? Or are we going to fall behind in productivity? Are we going to lead in mission success across the entire solar system? Or are we going to miss out on the future of exploration? So for all of us, the choice is obsolescence versus competitiveness. And every day, there's 2.5 exabytes. That's 2.5 quintillion bytes every 24 hours that are making that choice abundantly clear. Thank you.
Thanks again, Keoki. That was great. And as I noted in my opening, but you really brought to life, innovation comes from people. And so thank you for those insights, Keoki. But I also should note that in the workplace and the workforce of the 21st century, we are seeing some deep transformations taking place, but we're also seeing some unprecedented challenges. And perhaps we see this nowhere clearer than in the energy industry and the energy sector, with nearly 2 million Americans employed in jobs that are directly related to electrical generation, and another 2.5 million Americans who work in industries that are directly or partially related to things like energy efficiency and energy productivity. As we look more deeply into the demographics of this sector, we perhaps see some troubling trends. For example, let's look at workforce demographics. Just 2 years ago, the Nuclear Energy Institute estimated that 39% of the nuclear industry's workforce would be eligible for retirement by the year 2018. That's literally just days away. Yet with challenges come opportunities. And I'd like to invite up to the stage to talk about some of these challenges and opportunities our second set of Innovation Insight leaders. Mr. Nicholas Akins, the Chairman, President, and Chief Executive Officer of American Electric Power, and Mr. Lonnie Stephenson, the International President of the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers. Thank you. Yep. Okay, we're just going to jump right into it. Our time is short, gentlemen. But so Nick and Lonnie, we've heard a lot today about the explosion of information technologies and other technologies that are really relevant for your industries. Distributed generation, smart home devices, electric battery storage innovations. All of these and many other innovations are leading to new businesses, new employment opportunities, but they're also going to require new sets of skills, new workers. So taking into account this new reality, I first want to perhaps just get a snapshot, a response from you about those general trends. And then I'd like to dive into a second set of questions that's really about what you see as some of the most important challenges and opportunities in matching skills and matching workforce training to these new demands. So Nick, would you like to kick off?
Well, absolutely. Our industry is in such a traumatic change right now, and it's really appropriate that the previous presentation finished with big data. Big data analytics, certainly the focus on technology innovation are transforming our industry. Historically, it's been an industry built around generation, transmission, and distribution of electric power. Today, it's more than that, much more than that. It's cybersecurity, certainly physical security, but also in terms of the way innovation is occurring. We're not only taking advantage of distributed resources themselves, but also customer usage patterns. Individual customers have different ways of using the product that we deliver. And if you can aggregate all that and use it, it actually produces tremendous value proposition for our customers. So it's truly an industry, though, as you mentioned, with the workforce development requirements associated with that. We not only have to map the replacement of people who could retire, and there's just in our company alone, we'll have 5,000 people retire over the next, really around the next 5 years. And we have to really map that out, but we also have to think about what are those jobs of the future. Data analytics. Certainly from a technology perspective, we've got to have a different view of how that automation and digitization is going to have an impact on our business. We supply a product that this country absolutely needs. Puerto Rico is a perfect example of that today. We're in Puerto Rico today, but doing work there. There's no question that as we move this transition forward, we're going to have to think about, number one, ensuring that we have the workforce of today, but also bridging into that workforce of tomorrow. And certainly the IBEW and AEP have been instrumentally involved with that.
Lonnie, any thoughts, reactions?
Yeah, it's, as we do the transformation and go into more of the renewable energies, the alignment of today is certainly much different than the alignment from tomorrow. If you told me 20 years ago that alignment would have to be working with computers and doing all that type of electronics, they were climbing the poles and working physically, and they still do and still will. But they're also going to have those additional skills that they're going to have, to do all the electronic part and the computer skills as well.
Well, what if we could go a little bit deeper with what you've both described? Nick, you painted a picture of frankly, a new industry that's emerging.
Right.
What do you see are some of those skills that you need to develop? How are you partnering with the IBEW to get what you need? And Lonnie, I would ask you a mirrored question. What's been the IBEW's experience with with Nick and his team, and how are you working together? I'm curious about, this council is all about the collaboration and convergence of industry and labor, and it was sitting right here in front of us. And so would love for you to give this the case study.
I can certainly tell you, IBEW and AEP have worked together for over 100 years. And we have over 1 billion work hours that we've worked on projects that really have changed the world. The largest transmission system in the country, generation, the first of its kind in many areas associated with that. And we continue to make that evolution, whether it's solar, whether it's wind. Now we're thinking about, okay, what does that mean in terms of the grid itself, the electric grid itself, and the optimization and efficiencies driven by new technologies, what effect that's going to have on the workforce requirements of tomorrow. Apprenticeship has long been something that we have done. The IBEW has done that for their entire history, training associated with that, but also expanding that training to include these new technologies and how to use the new technologies going forward. It's just an instrumental part of the transition that we need to make.
Lonnie, any thoughts?
Yeah, and again, with the training, we right now in the construction side of the house, of course, our construction side supplements our utility partners, when they've got their utility employees, but when they've got bigger projects, maybe they got a transmission line, then they'll use contractors. And so the same thing, we're bringing in more training, doing more training for our outside construction. And then we partner very closely with our utility partners. I call them partners and not employers because we truly are a partnership. And we're very proud of the relationship we have with all of our utility companies and working together and collaborating to make sure that we're getting quality workers, quality applicants, you know, to be hired by the utilities and also in construction.
We're also partnering with the technical colleges.
Yeah, okay.
I think there's a real issue here. We have a shortage of line personnel across this country, but also in terms of these new technologies to make sure we have people that can do these kinds of work. We're starting everything from STEM-related education, early and middle school to high school, and mapping those careers into jobs, jobs today and jobs of the future as well.
Well, I want to go deeper there. You know, you mentioned just a few minutes ago building things like the largest transmission project in the world. And we've heard earlier in the day about the scale of the challenges and opportunities, not just in the United States, but even globally. As you begin to think about your next big project, you know, the next generation that you think will be able to deliver the energy we all need, one, I'm interested how you begin to think about that, how you begin to pull together the partnerships that are make that happen. And I was curious, in addition to obviously the great work and the partnership with labor, what are the new opportunities with the community colleges, technical colleges? Are there things that you see that you need that aren't there yet? Are there things that people in this room can help you with? And Lonnie, I would pose the same question to you as well.
Absolutely, from our perspective, cyber, physical security, certainly from a computing standpoint, making sure that we have those kinds of skills to be able to adapt to many of these new technologies are digital and automation type technologies. If we want to continue to drive efficiency at the same time as providing the overall benefits to everyone in our society of electricity and how to use it, we've got to ensure that our people can really map to those particular sets of skills. Data analysts, I mean, the market is pretty strong for data analysts these days, and when you think about the change from a historic system that we have today versus what we're going to see in the future, the digitization and automation associated with that are going to drive huge amounts of analytics associated with it that we didn't even have before. I grew up as an electrical engineer running power systems and always thought of this is the way things are mapped together, but there's a whole new realm there. It goes back to the customer as well. And certainly the IBEW is part of that process. And I'll give you two examples. Smart cities, AEP and the City of Columbus won the Smart Cities Challenge.
Yeah.
We're in the process of developing that activity within the city, and that goes to extension beyond the electric system into electric vehicles, automation, street lighting. All those types of aspects should be mapped together to provide these benefits to society. That means we have to expand the bandwidth of the workforce associated with that, and certainly the IBEW is working to do that as well.
Any thoughts?
Yeah, and you know, another thing we're doing in partnership with our utilities is to try to get more workers that are qualified and know what, especially on the line side. We've got these utility trust fund where we've actually built some training centers across the country where smaller utilities that maybe don't have the resources to start their own apprenticeship and training, but they're needing to start up and do training now because of the aging workforce. We now have this opportunity. We can get people go through and this training. It's almost like a boot camp. They can go through and get a feel for what the trade is, what kind of work it is, and then after they come out of that, it gives a pool of employees for the employers to take a look at on whether they want to hire them. Because somebody, especially on the line side, I can tell you I've interviewed a number of people that want to be a line apprentice, and first thing you ask them, do you have any problems with heights? No, I have any problem with that. 30% of our apprentices that come through, they break out the first, we have a boot camp to go through and just learn how to climb a pole. 30% of them don't make it past that point, because obviously that's a huge skill you have to have.
Like the SEALs of
Yeah, exactly.
Well, there's another aspect too that people don't realize. You know, there's a shortage of line personnel today.
Yeah.
The apprenticeship program takes 5 years to get to a fully functional line person.
Yeah.
So it
Big
really
investment.
is something you have to think about.
I want to go back to, because I'm intrigued by this point around training centers. But I want to link it, Nick, to something you also said, because I see a deputy director from Lawrence Livermore National Lab in front of me. I see other national lab leaders. I'm curious about something you teased up around the smart cities point. And you talked about data analytics, greater and greater data needs, modeling and simulation. My other hat at the council, I'm thinking high performance computing capabilities, the shared national infrastructure that we have in our national laboratories that either probably already are engaged with you all or perhaps could be engaged more. I would love to hear your thoughts around what do you see as some of the tools that might be available that you already are using or perhaps need better access to actually do the work. Because when you talk about smart cities, as you said, it's not just about the grid, it's everything that's connected and these things draining more and more energy, and it's a huge challenge.
We're working with so many technology providers today, Silicon Valley and otherwise, that are working on aggregation of customer loads, aggregation of system data to be able to really provide capacity benefits so you don't have to build that next generation facility. Those are the kinds of things that are working. I'll give you an example. There's a company that we've been working with that some we've invested in, battery storage technologies we've invested in directly. But certainly when we talk about some of the aggregation, there's a company that does work with Target. I was in a Target store and they actually cause an event to occur. The lighting comes down 50% and I'm watching customers and they don't bat an eye. They're still looking at what they're shopping for. There's value in that. And there's value not only in the human psychology, but also in the systems themselves that go all the way back through the system. And that's what we're looking at.
Well, Lonnie, I also want to ask you a question that you raised, and it gets back to this training center idea. You're working with the men and women of the IBEW every day. What are you hearing from them? What is exciting them to be engaged with companies like Nick's and others? And how are you responding to that? What's the new labor movement looking like in this space?
Well, especially with our utility partners, they're good paying jobs.
Yeah.
When those folks, they go to work for the utilities, they're good quality jobs because there's a lot of skill. They got to have a lot of skill set. But they are, they're good middle class jobs. They can provide for their families. And, we need more of that. We need more of those type of jobs. The utility industry provides that. And, we love the partnership we have. I'll give you an example with all the storms that went down. Our utilities have what they call mutual aid. With the utilities, I don't know how many people know that. When they bring linemen and linewomen from all over the United States and Canada, was down in Texas, down in Florida, and now we've got a number of them down in Puerto Rico. That we can bring all these people. They really are the first responders, you think about it. Yeah. Everybody's running away from the storms. Our guys are driving down there, getting all their equipment ready to go. As soon as the storm passes, they're trying to get things back online. So we're proud of what we do with our utility partners.
And I'll add to that too, from the IBEW perspective, you have a program called Code of Excellence.
Yep.
And that program is really focused on making sure people have the training necessary, but also have the right attitude associated with the work that they're doing. When you have an IBEW worker on your premises, you know exactly what you're going to get. They're educated, they know what they're doing, and many people think the unions are primarily, craft, construction. It goes well beyond that. There are people that, some of these jobs require a degree in molecular chemistry. So there certainly are across the bandwidth those kinds of requirements, and for the IBEW to be presenting those kinds of professionals to our industry is extremely important to not only the security of this country and what we do every day, but also in terms of sustainability of our company.
We have a few minutes remaining. I'd love to open it up. If there are any questions, people start thinking about them. And please raise your hand and we'll get a mic to you. But in waiting, please, Tom. And please introduce yourself so our great panelists know who you are. Oh, here's a mic for you.
Tom Baruch. I was curious, and are you using drones for any of the maintenance, inspection, etc.? And what kind of outcomes have you had?
Yeah, we absolutely are. Matter of fact, Hurricane Harvey, the hurricane season that's come through, Hurricane Irma, we're using drone technologies. We had to work quite extensively with the federal government to get airspace cleared so we could use them during those kinds of things. But you're going to see more drone technologies continue to develop, not only in terms of regular maintenance, which is occurring today, but also in terms of some element of reparations. You're seeing a lot of research in that perspective. So then you got to think about, okay, what's the skill set? Well, you need drone operators, right? And you also need people who know about the electric system. So it's a natural extension to the jobs that are out there.
Nick, a quick question for you. The council has had a long-standing history over the past decade really exploring things like energy security, sustainability, innovation in the energy space, and of course now coupling it with what we think is the key driver for a manufacturing renaissance in this country. As you think about what you provide and what you deliver, how do you think about linking that to the manufacturing customer and the value you provide? And what do you see as the real opportunity? Do you see, as we do, energy strength and abundance? Or do you see some fundamental challenges going ahead that you think as a nation we need to address, whether they're talent, which we discussed, or is it an infrastructure issue that you'd like to see that we maybe spend a little more time on?
Well, certainly, we have to ensure that this transformation doesn't impede the progress of manufacturing. We serve the Midwest and South Central part of the U.S. A large amount of our customer base is industrial and manufacturing, so we're very concerned about that in terms of competitiveness. Our business is not about building that next central station generation facility that costs a lot of money. It's about optimization and efficiency. And big data analytics, the new technologies, the automation, the digitization, all those things lead to the ability to provide that operating efficiency to ensure that our manufacturers remain competitive and want to locate in our territory.
And Lonnie, I don't know if you have a reaction to that, but I would love to hear from you.
Well, I think, that we got to keep in mind, too, as they talk about infrastructure in the country. They need to be thinking about energy and infrastructure as well.
Because we've given it a pretty low grade.
We've got to have exactly. They talk about roads and bridges, but energy, we've got to be able to make sure that our grid is brought up to the modern standards. Right. We've got to get more transmission lines. So if there's issues that would happen in one area or the other, we can, move it around, switch it around, and still keep things up and running. So there's a lot of modernization that needs to come, even though we're headed that direction. Many of our utility companies are already heading that direction, but there's a lot that needs to be done.
Well, so there's a lot that needs to be done. I don't want to put you on the spot in terms of rating, but if there's one thing from an infrastructure perspective that we could do as a country that would really improve our competitive position for the next 10 to 20 to 30 years, what would each of you say to that? How would you respond?
I would say investment, innovation, and technology. This industry is the most capital-intensive industry there is in this country by far. Over $100 billion a year of capital is put into this business. And for us to make those kinds of long-term decisions, we need consistency from a public policy standpoint to ensure that we are making the right decisions as we go forward. But there's no question, with technology changing the way it is today, we do need to have that forward view of what this industry is expecting, what our customers and shareholders are expecting as well.
Any closing thoughts there?
Yeah, I think, the same thing, like on the construction side of the house, when we're continuing to bring people in to train to do all this additional work that's need to be done right now, having that, the ability for them to know that, this is a career that's going to be a sustainable career, and that they're going to be able to make, a lifetime living at. So that's something, when we're bringing in new people, we're always thinking about that. Are we going to be able to sustain all these jobs? Right now, we need everybody we can get.
Well, I think from the perspective of the Council on Competitiveness, that last point is critical. As we've heard earlier in the day, we face some long-term productivity challenges in this nation, but ultimately it's about prosperity and are we creating an inclusive, growing economy for the average American. And I think you've provided, both of you, some insights into at least how one major sector in our economy is really turbocharging and has the potential to make that happen. So I want to thank you both and look forward to working with you going forward.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks again, Nick and Lonnie. So we're going to pivot a little bit here. This is a little bit of an unconventional setup. We're just going to slide right into another conversation But it's going to be about another, I think, critical emerging set of technology challenges that really are at the heart of American competitiveness, ingenuity, and innovation. The massive transformations that we're living through today aren't just about big data and analytics, although that's really critical. And they're not just about the changing profile of the American workforce, although that's also really critical. But another transformation that's at the heart of our long-term productivity potential is coupling both of these in ways in which we're moving people, ways in which we are moving goods and services. We are truly living through a state of upheaval in mobility. We are in an era of on-demand transportation. Frankly, we're living in an era of on-demand lifestyles, with industries constantly redefining themselves daily through the integration and deployment of things like in-car or on-bike GPS, which is linked to a QR code or to a wireless mobile payment system, but all of which is surrounded by ubiquity, low cost, and convenience for consumers. So I'd like to go deeper on these things. I see our two panelists coming up to the stage, so I'd like to really welcome Dr. Pradeep Khosla, the Chancellor of the University of California, San Diego, and Mr. Rehan Chaudri, the Principal at Altrinsic Global Advisors. Okay, guys, we've also, like the last panel, we have a short time, so we're just going to get right into it. So I'm going to get your reactions to something I want to just pose for you. It seems like we know a great deal about how human beings engage with traditional modes of transportation, traditional modes of travel, but we seem to know less today about how on-demand autonomous systems and vehicles are going to respond to humans in cities, in the twisty roads of our suburbs, on our highways. And we also seem to have to learn a lot more about how humans are going to be reshaping their own lives in a world of greater mobility and autonomy. So Pradeep, maybe I'm going to start with you, but Rehan, I want to ask you the same question and jump in. Pradeep, what do you really see as the major societal transformations and the implications of those transformations as we live and grow in this sort of more on-demand, super mobile paradigm?
So I think we need to think about on-demand is not just about transportation.
Right.
It's also about consuming content. I mean, on-demand consumption of video and all sorts of stuff, playing games, right? I think there's going to be some fundamental structural changes in the economy. We are headed towards what I think of as a zero marginal cost economy. So you will have a zero marginal cost to own a car. As in you own, like Uber is a great example where somebody has the asset, I just pay the fare and I'm done. There will be zero emissions on these cars, but there's zero marginal emissions because the manufacturing of the car led to emissions, but the operation does not if they're all electric, right? Yeah. There'll be zero accidents, right. And there will be zero accidents, zero cost of ownership, zero environmental impact, and this fundamentally changes everything. So imagine now that people who have made their livelihood by, let's say, manufacturing dishwashers and dryers, where every one of us who has a home has to buy one, buy at least one. Now imagine that you don't need as many homes because everybody's living in a room or two rooms in a larger commune type of environment, or in a, right? Imagine not everybody has a dishwasher. So you can see fundamental structural changes in the economy. Your behavior is changing, the way you live is changing, the amount of money you need to live is changing, and that's what you're seeing with the millennials, where they are spending way less money than they are, than you and I used to. Exactly right. So I see a fundamental shift, and I think it's going to crack the economy completely open. So I just want to make one more point, which is living in this economy is going to take more technical savvy than today. So it's not just about creating jobs or getting jobs, but just living there is going to take technical savvy.
Which links back to what we heard from President Crow earlier in the day around the need for greater literacy in all domains, just for living.
Yeah.
Rehan, thoughts?
No, thank you. I echo what Dr. Khosla is saying. If we do look at the current model for transportation, it's highly inefficient. 95% of cars are not utilized.
Right.
It is one of the most inefficient utilizations within the current economic landscape. 1.2 million fatalities, unfortunately, occur per annum. And if you look at the cost of ownership for an industrial combustion engine car, it's about $7,000 above. So if we look at the economic impacts, not only are there specifically for cars, but traffic congestion has caused enormous impacts. So there are estimates that it costs 2 to 4% of GDP. If you look at 20 of the 25% most congested cities in the world are the emerging markets. Right. So that's Mexico City, the top 5 are Mexico City, Istanbul, Bangkok, Moscow, and Bucharest. So incredible amount of reduction, not only in time and wasted economics, but also in health. They say the average child in Bangkok, their IQ points drop by about over 5% just to the lead poisoning in the atmosphere. And if we look at atmospheric effects of CO2, we're close to a half a billion period high. So the current system is highly inefficient. So what is the new system? And as Dr. Khosla discussed, the new system is where the cost of a pooled taxi is about $2.50 per mile. An autonomous electric vehicle is 17 cents. So Dr. Khosla was saying we're going towards the laws of zeros exponentially. So it's logarithmic-based returns. The cost of battery technology is dropping in the mid-teen levels. So by the middle of the next decade, an electrical vehicle list price will be the same as an industrial combustion engine. And if you look at that, by 2020, 2021, the total cost of ownership will be the same. So the effects will be quite dramatic. Additionally, if you look at urban space, up to 25% of urban space is based on parking. Now, those parking garages perhaps may not be needed. They will be reconfigured into other high utilization areas. And in the same time, instead of driving and being occupied with driving, the car can actually become a mobile office in many ways.
Right.
You can get a lot more work done, or entertainment, or rest.
It becomes a mobile battery if you want to charge.
Yeah, so the world looks at total factor productivity actually declining over time. The energy revolution is one where we actually will see an increase, and the increase will be positively beneficial to the world economy beyond what current economists are expecting. And additionally, if you combine that with solar energy, baseload solar, distributed generation energies that Nicholas and Lonnie were just speaking about, if you look at the world which has the least amount of electricity, has the highest amount of sunlight. It also has the greatest differential between male and female education. And the only pro forma predictor of GDP growth rates, although many aspects are towards accelerated GDP growth rates, statistically the only one is female education, the delta. So the revolution that will take place within the Sun Belt, where we already have the fastest growing economies that face huge bottlenecks, will be revolutionary.
Well, I want to stay on this theme of the revolutionary. So, and I want to pursue 2 threads. One is a technological thread. So both of you mentioned some, or hinted at some technologies that you might see coming down the road that might lead toward this zero marginal cost world, or towards a greater energy efficient productive world. So I'd like to hear from you both a little bit more about, predict a little bit more for us. Get out the crystal balls. And then I want, if you could also link that to the talent point you just made. So couple that technological opportunity with what you see as, and Pradeep, you're perfectly poised for this. What do we need from our students to make that world come to life?
Right. So let's talk about a zero marginal cost world. So right now, if you live in a reasonably sunny place, you can have somebody install solar panels on your house, which will power your house 24/7, plus throw some electricity on the grid.
Yep.
And you will get paid for it. In fact, you pay nothing.
Right.
You get paid for it. So some operator somewhere has got the cash, has the assets, deploys the assets, is using your rooftop as real estate, right? So that to me is zero marginal cost. And I think one will see the same thing happening in a whole range of areas. So the impact of this is that as a user now, or as somebody who's living in society, I have to be able to understand what this means, because it's so non-intuitive to tell somebody, it's telling somebody the Brooklyn Bridge, right? Hey, I'll give it to you for free.
But really potentially empowering.
Exactly, but you have to be aware. You have to be, how should I say, you should be a literate consumer. You need to understand, have technical savvy to understand how this works, and how is it that you're getting something for free and somebody else is making money, right? So this is no different than me looking at your assets and deciding you don't know how to monetize the assets, or you don't have the cash. I will have the idea and the cash, and I'm going to use your assets to create some value for myself and throw some for you in the meantime, right?
Well, thanks.
And by the way, if you just look at some of these predictions, the passenger economy, as it's called, by 2050 or so, is going to be a $7 trillion economy. So out of 20 trillion right now, the question is, Does it add 7 trillion or is it part of the 20 trillion?
Yeah, right. Rehan?
May I answer that question in a
Yeah.
slightly different perspective?
Yeah, please.
Dr. Khosla is far more involved in the social aspects and the impacts. Can I discuss perhaps how within this food chain, how can we make money?
Yeah.
Because we're in an era where there's so much disruption, there's more ideas about how capital will be lost versus where the opportunities are. And I think the opportunities are threefold. We will shift away from a petroleum-based transportation industry probably by the middle of the next decade. So the oil demand peak will probably hit by 2023, 2024 as electric vehicle costs come down. Now this will benefit other sources of minerals. I think there are minerals that one can bet on: nickel, cobalt, zinc, lead, a whole bunch of areas. But the battery technology is changing very rapidly, and so it comes back to, do we bet on VHS or Betamax? We don't know, or at least I don't know. So the one commodity I think that will continue to do very high demand will be copper. Because as we have much more taxation on the grid, the copper demand will go high. Copper is actually about, our grids are very old and aged. It's very quickly where that can actually disrupt that. The second area that we can benefit is electrical management that Lonnie and Nicholas had mentioned in the last. So companies, the number of companies in the U.S. would be, say, companies like Eaton, Parker Hannifin, ABB Schneider in Europe, Yaskawa, and Fanuc and Mitsubishi in Japan. So these companies are the picks and shovels that will help enhance the electric grid into an intelligent area where we can manage the electricity coming off the grid onto the grid and electricity coming back, and to optimize that. The third opportunity, which is a bit unusual that we have to think out of the box, was the fact that many countries import significant amounts of oil. Now, if we do look at the price of solar energy in India, it's now down to below 5 rupees per kilowatt hour. A diesel genset is 35 rupees per kilowatt hour. So there's estimates that in India, 50% excuse me, of the official grid capacity is actually diesel imports and diesel generators. So as we go away from that towards battery, renewable, localized industry, there will be much less oil imported. As oil imported is less, foreign currency stops going out. You have actually much better financial conditions, interest rates go down, and the fixed asset property prices will boom. So the areas of the world that will boom will be areas that are currently importing oil, that are investing in renewables, versus the countries that are actually exporting oil will face negative economic impacts. So those are the three areas for me, as apologies, from a capitalistic perspective, where I'm looking to make money.
I want to give obviously a chance we have about 2 or 3 minutes left to give the audience a chance to ask any questions. So if there are any, raise your hand. But Pradeep, I wanted just to go back one more time, and you're positioned in a beautiful part of the world. You've got great students. You have a tremendous university that you're leading. You're at the cutting edge of technologies. Where do you see in this space of this highly on-demand, mobile, zero marginal cost world, what are students telling you about where they want to go, and how are you helping to empower them to really capitalize on what Rehan's describing?
Right. So I think it's not the students as much as their parents. These 18-year-old, their parents, no, seriously, they're only about like 40 years old, 40, 45-year-old, right? And a third of our students are first generation, and first generation families really focus on, is my kid going to have a better life than I would, just like all of us have had. And now these parents are really concerned that they may not. So they want to focus on STEM, they want to focus on health, they want to focus on medical sciences, and in these areas, so which is all fine and great. But as chancellor, what causes me concern is a de-emphasis on arts, humanities, social sciences, because these are the areas, believe it or not, it's not mathematics that allows you to do critical thinking. Mathematics allows you to do some sort of algebraic problem solving. Critical thinking, making an argument, is through English, is through philosophy, is through political science. And these are the areas that are being de-emphasized within the families, through the students, onto our campuses. And I think we are in a downward spiral that, for me as chancellor, that causes me concern.
So Rehan, how do you respond to that? As you think about capitalizing on the opportunities, is what the chancellor's saying, does that matter to you or to folks in your world?
The human experience is complicated. The reliance solely on technology is based on binary. It's based on binary logic. And as Dr. Khosla mentioned, the world is actually a matter of solving human solutions and human problems. So technology is a tool.
Right.
So we need not only power engineers, distributed generation is going in this area, a very different area, artificial intelligence, miners, you know, Bitcoin miners, perhaps Jeffrey will discuss after me, but I'm much more into hard asset copper miners in different areas. But we need a combination of a broad-based area. Human progress never comes from a narrow group. It comes from the interdisciplinary approach. And when I've heard some of the professors and chancellors speak here at the conference, it gives me great confidence that they understand this. And they want the interdisciplinary approach rather than the silo approach that we had during the industrial economy. This is a knowledge-based economy, requires diverse knowledge, but depth. And so the educational institutions that presented here, I think, are providing the future.
We're getting the red light here, but Pradeep and Rehan, any final closing thoughts? You know, obviously you've talked a lot of, this is a global conversation, that's fair enough. This is a national competitiveness forum. Pulling from what you've just shared with us, what would be your one recommendation for the U.S. in this space? What could we do to ensure that we are actually leveraging these tremendous opportunities?
You know, it's easy for me to say just invest more in research, but I think fundamentally you're going to see different business models, and I think we need to create an understanding of how these business models leads to opportunities. So for example, I can imagine car companies are just asset owners now, and they're operating, they're giving mobility as a service. I can imagine them becoming transportation network service providers, right? Which is going to create job opportunities for these companies which are beyond the industrial engineer, the mechanical, the electrical. And I think we need to be thinking about, as educators, what are those areas that we open up in?
Yeah.
My view towards the future is based on our youth, and it's based on our students. And as universities require a more interdisciplinary approach, where engineers look at humanities learns the mathematics area, and we get different groups to speak to each other, as the other earlier chancellor from the University of Arizona had mentioned, the mix of getting biomedical with the pure sciences. This is a completely new way of knowledge learning, although it has huge historical precedents, and from 2,000 or 3,000 years ago, this is the way humans learned. But we became so industrialized and siloed in the past century that reorganization requires innovative leaders like Dr. Khosla.
Oh, geez. Thank you.
Well, thank
on
you
that
guys.
note.
Thank you both. Yeah, on that note. Thanks. Well, thanks again, Pradeep and Rehan. Fascinating. I have to just tell a quick story. I was actually recently in Phoenix, and with a colleague of mine, Dr. Roberto Alvarez, who leads our Global Federation of Competitiveness Councils, and we ordered an Uber, which was driverless. But the driverless Uber actually had two drivers. One is a driver just in case we went off the road and he could try to save us, and the other was an engineer. So we're not quite there yet, but we're getting there. So thanks again. Earlier, we heard from Nick and Lonnie's take about workforce challenges and the opportunities in the energy sector. We just heard from Pradeep and Rehan about how autonomy and this on-demand paradigm is radically changing our society. But what if the transformations go even deeper? Concerns are mounting around the appearance and rapidly advancing capability of robotics and artificial intelligence across the entire economy, both of which are triggering a number of dramatic and dire predictions about the future of the human workforce. Some estimate that nearly 50% of the world's current work can be automated using already demonstrated technologies. And similar estimates contend that up to 800 million people, including a third of the US workforce, could lose their current job by 2030. So we're hearing this constant drumbeat of gloom and doom. But what's really happening? Might we not see a growing demand for workers and the creation of new jobs and new opportunities that don't even exist today? Might we not see the demand for work and workers increase, partly fueled by technology-driven productivity growth? I'm happy to have on stage and to invite to address these issues Mr. Nicholas Pinchuk, the Chairman and Chief Executive Officer of Snap-on Incorporated, to really help us sort through these trends and the conventional wisdom. Nick, it's over to you.
The title of my talk is The Robots Are Coming. The robots are coming. The robots are coming. I feel like Paul Revere. And I guess the follow-up question, are humans going to be needed? Sure they are. By the way, Chad, no one's called me Nicholas since Sister Frances Loretta in the first grade. So therefore, I'd like you to say Nick Pinchuk in the future. But look, my talk's going to be like this. The robots are coming, it's inevitable, but the time constants associated with that rise are uncertain. Believe me, singularities are few. Whatever happens, and when they come, they represent a risk to America. America's strength has always been our population, and they are a risk to our self-esteem. Because America's view of itself always has to do with work. But there's good news associated with this, because they don't threaten everything, and there are ways around this. And the path to, I think, managing through this has to do with capabilities spread across our workforce. That is the upskilling of the American workforce. I've said from many podiums that this is the seminal issue of our time, and so it is. The question is how to deliver that upskilling and how to overcome the perceptional question of your job's going to go away because the robots are coming. I'm just a simple tool maker. You heard from PhDs and all those other people. I'll give you my 10-second resume, and that is I was educated as an engineer in the East. I started life as a football coach. Fought with the American Army in Vietnam, was a CFO, a chief strategic officer, lived for 11 years in Asia, and then by stroke of luck came to the great Snap-on company, none of which has much to do with me, but it's been the good fortune of my life. Along that time, I have closed, much to my embarrassment and shame, several factories. I've opened many more factories. And the people who have enlisted in those businesses that I've been associated with, I think, have built lives of prosperity and pride and dignity, of which I am very proud. I've met extraordinary leaders beyond my station, including the eminent and the honorable Deborah Wynne-Smith, who leads this organization and is down here. But after all of that, the thing that's most important, I have to tell you this about myself, because it has something to do with the rest of my talk. The thing I'm most proud of is, I delivered my own daughter in the backseat of a car in an A&P parking lot at 4:30 in the morning. And when I ran around the back and went into the back seat and grabbed that baby by the ankles and hit it on the rear end and heard it breathe its first breath and make its first sound, it was a great moment. And my wife asked me, is it a boy or a girl? And in the backseat of that car in the A&P parking lot at 4:30 in the morning in the dark, I was fooled by an umbilical cord. It's a true story. It has something to do with later, so keep that in mind, right? Okay, look, the robots are coming, but history's singularity is the contemporary's ramp. In 1829 was the first time we saw indoor plumbing in the United States, but to Robert Johnson University, according to Robert Johnson University Chicago economists, in 1940, still 40% of the homes in America did not have indoor plumbing. 2006, I remember working on adaptive cruise control when I was a young engineer in 1969. It finally came to fruition in 2006 in automobiles, available as a feature. By 2020, it'll be 5%. So singularities occur, but the time constants are uncertain. That doesn't mean we shouldn't prepare for them. But it doesn't mean it's going to happen by next Thursday either, the fact that it can be done. And I think if you're talking about robots, that's the way we should look at it. It ain't going to happen by next Thursday, but it's coming. And so what does it mean? Well, it threatens America's very psyche, because our strength over all this time. One of the reasons why America's been ascendant is because of the brilliance of the few, the people who invent robots, but of the efforts of the many, the people who have made those capabilities and those inventions and those innovations so strong. And robots seem to threaten that. They further threaten our self-esteem. The American dream has always been about keeping your family warm and safe and dry and having lives of pride and dignity. And if you think that self-esteem isn't important, you didn't listen to Jim Clifton this morning, who said that one of the problems we're seeing is American males don't know what to do because they're not having jobs, and they're thinking, and I think a lot of people have tied the opioid crisis to this, although I'm not ready to do that from this podium. But Americans really know that our strength has been about contribution, broad contribution, and work, and it has been our strength. Makers and fixers spread across this nation. It's one of the reasons why we have so much angst when we see the middle class shrinking and their salaries not going up. And so you can see this. And in fact, okay, there's a lot of proposed solutions. Martin Ford wrote a book, The Rise of the Robots. He's from Silicon Valley, so he and I are quite different. And he says, look, we're going to have it, and a few people are going to have brilliant ideas, and the rest of the people are going to get a universal maintenance salary that'll keep them well. That's one way to go, but I think not for Americans. Derek Anderson, the Atlantic Monthly, wrote an article 2 years ago called World Without Work. And at the end of that, he concludes that a world where the brilliant few subsidize the millions through some sort of universal basic pay for America is the road to civic ruin and loss of self-esteem, and it would no longer be the America we know. And in fact, in competition with other countries, anybody can employ robots. Only America can take the hundreds of millions of people and deploy them to capability. It's an important factor, I believe, in terms of this. So there are ways. You can say, well, robots are going to replace everybody. I think the answer to this is robots aren't like prior industries. They're going to replace the humans, and so it will be. But it's mostly the humans who are working on repetitive jobs. If you read the New York Times yesterday, it was a propitious article for my talk anyway. Alex Williams had a talk about, will robots take my child's job? And then I think he ends up with a great line, I thought. He says, talking about the idea that repetitive jobs of all kinds, blue collar and white collar, will be repaired, but jobs that deal with variation will not. The final line is a great one that's near and dear to my heart. He said, the robot plumber is far, 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 far in the future, and so it is for the mechanic and many other things. And I can tell you that if you think about Snap-on, Snap-on's a tool maker. We make tools. Yet, and we have adopted robot after robot after robot after robot from sea to shining sea, and yet our employment has grown. And why is this? Because the obvious goal of robots, the obvious outcome of robots hasn't been the focus, and I don't think it'll be the focus in the future. Most people think that we're going to adopt robots so we can lower costs. I think that's wrong. I think we'll adopt robots, and we'll see they're best used to expand the customization of the services or the product, and therefore empower those people who can manage the variation in their jobs. That's what happens at Snap-on. We've expanded our employment while we've added robots. And there's a kind of visceral thing to it. Now this gets back to the beginning. Okay, can you imagine? I'm driving along, and my wife starts screaming in the back seat, and I had to depend on a robot in the back. I don't think so. I don't think the robot's ever going to be there. It depends on somebody like me to do it. And oh, by the way, if that robot had done it, I wouldn't have had that memory of being fooled by the umbilical cord. It's kind of a human example, but we have preferences for this. So the robots are coming. We don't know how fast. We know they threaten. We know they threaten our strength, and they threaten our esteem. They threaten the American dream. We know there's a way around it, but there's a price to pay, and that is upskilling the American workforce, making sure our workers can deal with the non-repetitive tasks. I've said this often. Upskilling the American workforce is the seminal issue of our time, and I see no path to prosperity without it happening. Part of it is expressed in the idea that we're in a global competition for jobs. People get ideas, and then the many compete to be the amplifiers of those ideas. We're in a global competition, and capability from upskilling is one of the differentiators that allow us to win this. But there's another factor, is as workplaces change, Americans have to change with them. So I'm urging a kind of emphasis on upskilling, not just in engineering school. Pradeep was up here talking about the fact that liberal arts are important for critical thinking. He doesn't understand the critical thinking that comes from the Zen of vehicle maintenance. But actually, the thing is, more and more, what we consider technical careers, welders and car mechanics and airline mechanics and a number of other things, require tremendous insight because they're wielding technology. That's in the future. We need to do that. So how do we do that? One is we need to make sure that the schools match the curriculum. That's not so easy for you educators. I think it's not. Sometimes when you approach educators and say, I'd like you to teach this, they say, What should a businessman say about education? Now, not all educators do that, and many are very receptive to this, and I think it's an efficacious relationship between business and education. But then there's the other thing. Increasingly, as we talk about robots, the perception of the stability of the jobs becomes more in question. So that people that accept jobs, whether you're talking about in a manufacturing factory or in a vehicle garage or maintaining rocket boosters, people think those jobs are going to be taken over. So there's a perception question, and we must guard against that. Because we can get in a situation where people say, the robots are coming, the robots are coming, the robots are coming, and then they interpret that as meaning that if you enlist in one of these jobs as a career, you have settled for the consolation prize of your society, and it is fit only in Huxley terms to the gamma minuses of our society. And this is something we must guard against, and the more we talk about the march of technology, the more that becomes a risk. We have to guard against it. So this is my pitch here today. I think it's pretty short. It's that the robots are coming, but it ain't happening by next Thursday. It's going to happen. We don't know what the rise is, but we got to get ready for them. They do threaten us. They threaten America's strength, the broad population which has always differentiated us, and our American dream, which is having a job which delivers by my own hand, by our own hands, ability to keep your family warm and safe and dry, and the generation of pride and the earning of pride and dignity. All is not lost, because there's a lot of jobs enabled by technology that require to deal with variation, but they require the increase in capability, and upskilling the American workforce by action and by perception of those jobs is the seminal issue of our time. There is nothing more important. You can look at it this way. When we see the future and we see robots, we can either say we're going to go to a universal minimum payment and say the American worker is a question, or we can say the American worker is the answer. And if we arm them with the capabilities, they will wield technology to our advantage, to our national advantage, as it always has been. Thank you all for listening to this, and I wish you all a happy holiday and a great new year.
Thanks a lot, Nick. I have to just shake your hand.
Okay.
Thanks a lot. Well, thanks for many things, Nick, including reaffirming human potential. Well, the radical changes that we've explored so far in these sets of conversations aren't limited solely to the manufacturing sector. Many of the disruptions that we've talked about are rippling as rapidly, if not even more rapidly, through all sorts of industries, including finance. In a recent Pew Institute study, 24% of Americans indicate they make no purchases using cash in a typical week. And nearly 40% indicate they don't particularly worry about having cash on hand to make purchases. And as we have heard every day in the news for the past 2 or 3 weeks, cryptocurrencies and virtual currencies are on a tear. The value of a Bitcoin has increased by 1,300% year to date. This rapid, quick emergence and exponential growth of a new type of currency tees up an even larger, more fundamental, long-term question for the United States and the rest of the world. Can we imagine a world in 100, 50, or 20 years in which the US dollar, or the euro, or the Chinese renminbi is no longer the global currency of choice? What would this mean for competitiveness in the United States and for the rest of the world? I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Mr. Jeffery Wernick, an independent private investor, to share some of his thoughts on this topic, both on Bitcoin, but also the underlying blockchain platform technology that's really revolutionizing the financial industry. So Jeffery, up to you. Thanks a lot.
Well, in beginning to talk about Bitcoin, I'd like to first discuss how it should be framed. Because I think there's mostly there's misinformation, disinformation, and many of it intentional, some of it unintentional. So we have to think about the framework under which the Bitcoin ecosystem and the blockchain ecosystem was designed. One is, and I'm just guessing to some extent, but I had been involved in conversations with people who were talking about creating digital currencies prior to the Satoshi paper, which appeared in 2008. So what was happening in 2008? We were in the midst of a financial crisis. So prior to 2008, if we really thought about, somebody would have said, the financial system is a fraud. While home prices are rising, everybody's feeling wonderful, nobody would pay attention. So what happened in 2008 is the financial system collapsed. The way the political institutions responded to it has been questioned by many people. So it became the perfect opportunity to say that there is alternative to fiat money. For a long time, there's been people, and when Ronald Reagan ran for president, and if people don't remember his platform in 1980 in supply-side economics, one of the things he talked about was not only cutting taxes, but going back to gold, a hard currency. And they formed the Gold Commission that ended up not embracing gold. So, and the average life of a fiat money regime is somewhere between around 45 years. So we're about 47 years into our fiat money regime. So what does Bitcoin and blockchain represent? With respect to what are the failures of a fiat regime? It's backed by nothing. So as opposed to gold-based money, which is considered a hard currency. But we don't need the hard currency anymore if we have something that's sort of a virtual currency that everybody can hold in their wallets. So that's exactly what. If you take a look at what happened when the United States was most competitive, was in the 19th century. Prior to us there being a central bank, when there was issues about really who even because the Constitution was first formed, had defined the U.S. dollar in terms of gold and silver. So we went through a period of time where we had no deposit insurance, no central bank, lots of bank failures with very small amount of depositor losses. So we had a financial system that people basically trusted. And through that system, the country grew. And then we created the Fed, then we created the tax code, then we created deposit insurance, and since then we've had a lot of volatility. When the financial system profits as a percentage of GDP, when Reagan was elected president, it was like 4 or 5%. Now I think it fluctuates between 17 to 20%. So why does the financial system have formed such a high percentage of our economy? Okay, mostly because of the fact of financial engineering. And why do we need financial engineering? Because the financial system creates a lot of volatility. And then we attempt to delude ourselves that the economy is proceeding well. If you take a look at this existing election right now, and why so many people were supporters of, without being political, of disaffected by the major parties. Because if you think about, the Democrats, there was a lot of empathy for Sanders, and for the Republicans, there was a lot of empathy clearly for Trump, and these were non-traditional candidates. So what was the appeal of the non-traditional candidates? Is that people really know the economy is not very good. If there's a website called Shadow Stats, written by this, and it's done by this economist John Williams. And in Shadow Stats, what they have is they say, here is alternative measures of GDP growth, inflation, and unemployment. So we used to have one measure of measuring government statistics in 1980. We revised it in 1990, and then after 2000, we used alternative measures called hedonics. So basically, we give a lot of discretion into how we measure output and inflation. So if we measured inflation the way we did in 1980, what do you think the inflation rate is today? What would you guess when Ronald Reagan was president, if we measure inflation exactly that way, what do you think the inflation rate is today? Anyone have a guess? 10%. 10%. Okay. So if we measured it according to the way we measured economics, this is in 1980, we've never recovered from the recession. Okay, right now negative GDP would be about 4.5%. Okay. If we measured it in the way we did in 1990, okay, inflation would be at 5%. So as opposed to the statistics we see right now. Because they're given a lot of discretion, and the fact is now they can alternate the basket. So they can sit back and say, I don't really buy that, but you theoretically could, or there's been a quality improvement that's not captured properly. So they have all these, so they're able to put all these assumptions into the model to basically have a lot of discretions. So really, we've rendered our economic statistics to be pretty meaningless. So the average person feels that their purchasing power, their wealth is worse off. We have student loans that can't get paid. We got a bankrupt pension system, and we have a fragile financial system. So, and what did we have to do in 2008? A lot of the bankers would talk about that they paid back their loans. They were forced to take the capital necessary. What they don't seem to talk about is the fact that the federal government guaranteed the deposit liabilities in the system for more than 18 months. So at the top, before the government guaranteed the deposit liabilities, the spread between bank funding costs and treasuries was over 400 basis points. As soon as the government announced that it was going to back up those deposit liabilities, it went back down to 40 basis points. So what do you think the value of that guarantee is? Is take all the amount of deposit liabilities in the financial system, okay, and assume that the government guarantee is worth 200, 300 basis points. So what do you think the value of that guarantee is to the financial system? I don't think anybody had access to that type of levels of guarantee. Then you had the investment banks that had unlimited borrowing at the discount window. I couldn't get to the discount window. So what happens is when Jamie Dimon says that Bitcoin is a fraud, he's the fraudster, okay? He's the one paying billions of dollars of fines for defrauding customers. And he has a system that if you give him money, you're going to be guaranteed that the purchasing power of the money will be less when he gives it back to you. Okay, if he chooses to give it back to you, because then you have to go back to him, knock on his door, and say, I want the money, but let me explain to you why I want to use the money. And if they're satisfied with the explanation, they'll give it back to you. That's our financial system today, right? If you want to wire funds out, I got to go and say, here's what I want to use it for. Here's where it came from, and this is what I want to use it for. And if they're not satisfied with the explanation, they don't have to give it to you. So it becomes their money, not your money. So I would like to be in the business where what I can do is I could take your money. I don't really have to give it back to you. Okay, I can pay you a low interest rate because the government is giving me deposit insurance. Okay, if I went out into the marketplace and tried to buy that deposit insurance, if Jamie Dimon went out into the world and said, I want to go out and I want to buy deposit insurance for my deposit liabilities, and he knocked on the door of Prudential Insurance or Lloyd's of London, whoever, and said, how much would I have to pay to guarantee my balance sheet to get a AAA rating, I could tell you it would be significantly more than what he has to pay into the FDIC. So the banking sector is the most subsidized sector, and it's the most fragile sector of the economy. So when people started saying, how do I preserve my capital in a system where I think that everything is tied to this fragile financial system that makes the pricing of all other assets derivative of it, is how do I create a store of value for myself? So for a number of times people went out who worried people like me, that you go out and you say, well, maybe I'll own agriculture, maybe I will own hard assets, real estate, I'll own some gold, but then eventually all these hard assets got bid up in value. But what we also want to do is what also happened during this period of time is trust got eroded. People don't trust their politicians, people don't trust any institutions. In the past you can trust institutions because what we do is we try and create contracting that sort of aligns our interests. Or we create this third-party intermediary, and that intermediary is a neutral observer, and that they convey trust. So what happens is by the same time we've debased our currency, we've also debased any institution as being a reliable agent, as a trust agent. So we sit back and say, well, how do we create platforms where we can sit and we can engage in transactions amongst ourselves and between ourselves, and not have to worry about trust, where trust becomes an irrelevant concept. So hence Bitcoin. Okay, so if you think about the rooms of Bitcoin, okay, if I was going to go out and start a financial system today, okay, starting from scratch, and nobody ever heard the term money before, and I got up here and said, okay, you're all really smart people here. We want to make sure that we distribute a means of exchange, that we can engage in transactions with each other where we're confident in the way we engage in transactions. So I come up with one idea. One idea is I'm going to go out to the forest, I'm going to top down some trees, make some paper, and give somebody a printing press. And this is the smartest person I know, so let them control the printing press and let them do whatever they want. Okay? They'll print as much as they want, whenever they want to do it, and distribute it according to their own criteria. Okay? Then you have another system that says, we're going to create a community that's going to go out, that's going to produce something according to certain rules. Okay? The rules are, we're going to create a consensus. So we're going to put all this energy into calculating, solving algorithms, and the algorithms are solved by a community of computers working together. It emits currency. And so we're going to have a certain amount of currency emitted each month, then a certain amount each year, and a certain amount issued over a certain period of time. And we're going to do it in a system where the infrastructure that creates that currency is basically unhackable. So you know that it can't be counterfeited, okay? And whatever's going on is on a distributed ledger that no one person controls, and whatever activity that goes on that ledger is open to everybody and audited by everybody. So which system would you choose? So I think if we started from zero, nobody would choose the system we had today. So I don't understand why anybody defends the system we have today unless you're an incumbent in it and profit from it. So the existing system today is the fraud, not Bitcoin. I think many people don't really understand the rules of how Bitcoin gets created, how it gets mined, and the fact that there's a quantity limit that impacts its life over how many Bitcoins get created each year and ultimately. So the last Bitcoin will be printed and will be emitted in about 2140. So we got a little more than 100 years left of Bitcoins. 75% of the Bitcoins have already been issued. So it's going to require more energy to produce every incremental Bitcoin because the algorithm gets more and more difficult to solve. But the point of making the algorithm more difficult to solve is to make the system more difficult and difficult to hack. So there's a real logic and an internal consistency into the model. Now, when people take a look at the Bitcoin, then you have to take a look at blockchain, where people read about Ethereum and the other things. You have to separate Bitcoin from any other crypto. Okay? Bitcoin has intrinsic value in and of itself, and it's because of the way it's created and the limit on it. So you could look at it as digital gold. The rest of the systems, Ethereums and all the other tokens that are being issued, they're ecosystems. Okay? They're ecosystems that require economic activity be put on it. So Ethereums are looking at creating smart contracts, and building applications on top of it. So the point of Ethereum is basically to build an economic ecosystem on top of it as a platform, and it's not really necessarily a currency like Bitcoin is a currency. So Bitcoin is very, very different from any other thing in the crypto world. Now, if you take a look at why the other cryptos exist, is we're transforming the economy. There was a guy who won a Nobel Prize in economics called Ronald Coase. And Ronald Coase basically said the question Ronald Coase asked is, why do we organize firms the way we do? Okay, so he said we organize firms in a way to mitigate transaction costs. So that's why we organize firms the way we did. Well, Bitcoin is an attempt to eliminate transaction costs, to make them so negligible. So if you have a distributed platform of information, and then you have a book where nobody controls it, and how people ascribe value to it is determined by the community. I'm going to give you a couple of examples on what I mean by this framework. Okay, if I go out right now and I put information on Facebook. Okay, so I put information on Facebook, or I'm looking on Amazon for books, or I'm doing Google searches. So I'm producing data. I'm producing information. So they take that information and they sell it. Okay, so they monetize it, and what do I get in return for them taking information about me and monetizing my data? So if you take a look at really what it means when we talk about, I heard people talk about work. I like to think about value, not work. So anybody who's engaged in as an activity is creating value because they're creating information. Okay, so anybody who creates information, people value that information. So if I'm going out there and I'm producing information out there, the problem is right now is instead of me controlling who I sell the information to and I receive the money, I'm basically giving all that power to Google, to Amazon, to Facebook, and they're selling it in a way that maximizes their value, not necessarily my value. I find it entertaining. I put something on my lifestyle. I put it out there. And in return, I'm giving them all this information. I'm sure if I went to people and said, you know what, with the information you're getting, that you're providing to these platforms, okay, if I would say that, that they're selling this information for X dollars, if I gave you X dollars to never use that platform again, which would you value more, the dollars of how much money they're getting with that information or your engagement with that platform? I would guess most people, if they really understood the value of the information they're conveying, probably would not be willing to offer it because there's no market price for it. Okay, so the question is how do we create a market price for our human capital? Okay, right now many businesses, their money is really not, they don't get the money because they're in the value business, they're in the rent extraction business. So the question is how do we create sovereignty over ourselves? So I'll say, for example, is that if I, a bunch of people here have a heart problem, okay? So one thing is we can sit back and say is we go to the doctors get all this medicine, it goes to the National Health Foundation, whoever, and they do all the research, and then we get, on our apps, we get reminders that we should take all these drugs or do all these things, or somebody always trying to sell us and nudge us to an activity or a product. I'm sure that really improves the quality of our lives, being nudged all day long or seeing ads all the way up. I'm sure we really love that. I'm sure we like paying for that, or conveying value for that. Can you imagine a platform where everybody walks around with their own digital health record? What if it's my information? I go to the doctor because I don't see, when I go to a hospital and I do a study, okay, I don't see them saying we're going to take all this data and sell it, so we're going to discount your treatment because we're going to sell the data. No, it's very expensive. But if I went to the hospital, I went to a doctor and I said, look, here's my digital wallet with my health records. I'm going to like the app Telegram. I'm going to send it to you in an app. You have 30 minutes to use it, so you have enough information where you can treat me, and then the information disappears because it's my information. And then I went out and I said, you know what, I want to build a platform. So I'm a platform designer. So I sit down as a platform designer, I say, you know what, I want to get everybody who has this health issue, okay, put data on this platform. Now, what I'm not going to know is I'm not going to know any individual and be able to look inside your data because you're going to have a public key and a private key. So you own that data, but you're agreeing to put it on this platform. So everybody puts this on the platform. We're going to sit back and say we're going to hire these people to be the governance of this platform. And what we're going to do is we're either going to sell the data to people who we find that we maximize the value of that data, or we're going to sell it to people who will, I guess I got to wrap up. I got to shut up. So I think it's telling you here. Or we're going to, or we can determine who people knocking on the door and says, you have this heart problem. Sell us this data. We're going to analyze the data, and this is why we credibly are people that can help you with your solution. So it empowers us. So what the blockchain and the decentralization is about empowering us. If we're talking about the previous talk was robots, human beings, whatever, I look at the individual. What creates sovereignty over ourselves? We've surrendered sovereignty of ourselves. We're giving all this value to third parties, okay, that are using it in ways that we would never pay them to use it, okay, because we don't know how to preserve property over the intangible aspects of who we are, okay. This is the power of the blockchain. The blockchain is when if everybody goes out and issues a currency, I can become a token myself. I can sit back and say, this is my value. So I can create the Jeffery token. And somebody might out there and say, Jeffery token has value to me. So what I'll do is I'll exchange. And that token might have value. I might have value to them. They might have value to me. So we might exchange tokens. We might engage in transactions. It basically makes the issuing of money and paper money kind of irrelevant. Because what we can all do is we can all engage in transactions relative to each other in a tokenized world. So that we're now controlling what exchange of value is, and we have an explicit price for all these transactions, okay? We don't need banks, we don't need debt. All we need is figuring out ways of how we turn our ideas and our personal capital into something other people value with this free exchange. So when people sit and talk to you about Bitcoin, blockchain, drug dealers, money laundering people, okay, they're all liars, okay? There's a lot more money going through the financial system than the Bitcoin community and any of this stuff. Okay, I don't believe drug dealers are running around or people in Afghanistan, terrorists, with their Bitcoin wallets in their hand and running to us saying, gee, I ran out of bullets. Okay, let me see who will take my Bitcoin in exchange for my bullets. Okay, not happening. Okay, not happening. Okay, They're using fiat money, okay? They're using money. They're using their credit cards, their debit cards, their cash, their dollars, their RMB, whatever. They're not using Bitcoin, okay? So the Bitcoin and the blockchain community is about returning power to the individual. That's what the community is about.
Thanks a lot, Jeffrey. We're going to move on to our next topic. You know, another industry that's undergoing tremendously exponential change is really healthcare. And like in many industries, healthcare finds itself at a critical inflection point, driven in large part by digitization. 100 years ago, healthcare was about the human touch. 25 years ago, healthcare was machine-assisted and analog. Today, healthcare is technology-enabled and digital. So think of 3D imaging, wearables, genomic decoding that's at prices nearly 100% less today than they were just 20 years ago. With all this happening so quickly and so fast, we're lucky to have with us today Dr. Victor Zhou, the president of the U.S. National Academy of Medicine. Dr. Zhou, would love to welcome you to the stage and share some of your thoughts.
Well, thank you very much, and I thoroughly enjoyed the last two speakers as I'm thinking about what about healthcare. So the topic I was given is frontiers in medicine, which I interpret broadly as including gene editing, stem cells, etc. So I'm going to tell you for the next 10 minutes what's going on in health and medicine. First of all, I struggle mightily to say, should it be a TED Talk or would I show slides? I went back to my Chinese roots that says a picture is worth 1,000 words. So you're going to see a set of slides. I think it's much easier to illustrate the complexity of many of the technology. And so I'd like to start by saying, another Chinese saying, we live in interesting times. So you think about healthcare and medicine, the challenge we face, as shown this slide, huge challenges: obesity, diabetes, hypertension, cancer, and of course, the silver tsunami, the aging population. And as you look at all those things, we're getting a larger and larger discrepancy between those who have and those who do not have the resources to get healthcare and health. And consequently, one also has to think about the whole context where we live in: urbanization, climate change, globalization, and that leads to, as you know, Ebola, pandemics, you name it. So the question is where we are. We're in a mess. And the issue is got to be solved by both a combination of technology and science as well as good policy. So what I'm going to do is going to demonstrate to you some of what I believe are medical breakthroughs and technological breakthroughs in health and medicine, in biomedicine and biotechnology, in engineering science and nanotechnology, and it's important now in data, robotics, artificial intelligence. So if you think about the medical breakthroughs, every day you can read a newspaper, a journal article, you name it, about a breakthrough. But some of these are true breakthroughs if you think about genetic engineering. As I'll talk about, we're at the point where we can edit individual genes and that's start treating diseases. Regenerative medicine, the use of stem cells to regenerate new tissues, and particularly in elderly and also in times of heart attack, stroke, etc. Immunotherapy, the ability to galvanize your immune system to fight cancer. Precision medicine, being able to precisely predict who's likely to get disease and what treatment you're going to get. Microbiome, the kind of microbiologic organisms in your gut and elsewhere that influence your health, and of course, tissue engineering. So I'm going to give you a first example. Human gene editing. This is an amazing technique. What you see in this picture on the, I believe when you look at it, it'll be left side, is the very simple technology to say, if I know a sequence of gene, I can create a system called CRISPR that can edit that gene like a molecular scissor, precisely. So now you can imagine you can take off a bad disease gene or mutation. You can also replace it with a good gene. And so the issue is the possibility of curing diseases. I showed you here two columns, one called somatic, which means disease that we all have, adult, acquired, but not at the time of embryo. that disease which we have can be now cured or treated with gene editing. For example, this is now 100-some people have been treated experimentally, knowing the receptor which the HIV virus attacks the T cell to make it, therefore, to kill it, making immune deficiency. That receptor, CCL5, now can be mutated so that HIV can enter. Consequently, guess what? You actually, in a way, enable you to treat HIV for long term. And so far, the data looks very promising that the triple therapy that you require are greatly reduced, and you can move that way. Second is taking cells from adult or from a person with a genetic disease such as sickle cell. We know it's a hemoglobin problem. And taking the cell, for example, the bone marrow cells, and then engineer to put in the right gene can cure potential disease. Now, the biggest challenge we face with is the ethical argument that can you actually treat a genetic disease at the time of an embryo or a sperm or an egg called gamete. This is called germline therapy. This is where the whole debate occurs with embryos and causing intergenerational changes. Think about also the possibility of doing designer babies. And in the time when you think about the Russians being, in fact, excluded from Olympics, think about the future of gene editing that can enhance your muscle performance, your brain performance, you name it. So very controversial issue, but clearly there are now thousands of companies being formed, and I would expect within the next 5 years you're going to see some real products being in the medical arena for curative, if not at least therapeutic purposes. Stem cells, embryo stem cells in your adult tissue can be now harvested, but also this really important work done by Yamanaka in Japan, won Nobel Prize. I can now take your skin cell and then genetically program it in the tissue culture and change it to an embryo, to a stem cell. So guess what? I don't need to go to embryos anymore. I can take an adult skin cell and make a stem cell, and now I can really treat many different diseases. To the next column, it says direct reprogramming. This is work that I do in my lab. That is genetic program a skin cell to a muscle cell directly without having to go through stem cell. So if you have a heart attack, as you know, when you have a heart attack, your cells die, then you form a scar, and then your heart gets dilated, you got heart failure. We can now, at least in the laboratory, engineer, genetically program a scar cell to become muscle cell, whereby with small molecules, you can actually repair the heart and regenerate. To tissue engineering, what you see in pictures here is a blood vessel that is, in fact, now entering clinical trial that is tissue engineered. And future, as you can see, the other picture is actually generating an entire heart using tissue engineering. In brain, the brain initiative is amazing. Now we can map genes and neurons and neural circuits in a live animal using a combination of light and activation of a gene called rhodopsin that can show you the neurons as being activated and follow the circuit. So you begin to understand the neural circuitry. Then what you see also here is the ability to do brain-machine interface. It's already happening. Somebody who has paraplegia now can use the brain to drive a computer to mobilize a robot, whereby, as you can see here, this person is able to move his limbs. And at Duke, one of my colleagues have demonstrated he can actually use brain driving actually a robot in China to move. So this is, in fact, real-life exciting opportunities. And, of course, precision medicine is not only sequencing genome for less than $1,000, but now you can measure so many things. And by measuring all these things together, the power of being able to precisely predict using a combination of data of what to treat, when to treat is amazing. So when you think about this, and I put this slide from Mahmoud Khan, but he's not here. He and I are good friends. I put down prevention is important. And the bottom of the slide is neutral genomics. It's already happening. That is, you begin to say, what diet do you take? Can you measure your response to a diet? Can you look at a genetic profile to decide what diet would be most useful for you? I want to illustrate 3 diseases where these things are being applied, and then get to, in fact, the whole issue of data and artificial intelligence. So heart disease, cancer, and aging. In heart disease, there's a whole slew of new drugs, new imaging, and new ways in which of approaching. But importantly, I want to point out the following. The devices. There's an amazing set of devices which are already deployed in the operating room and in clinics and also remotely. The hybrid operating room, how many people have heard of hybrid operating room? Probably nobody. So hybrid operating room is the ability in which you can image the patient on the OR at the same time doing surgery. Now, it used to be we'd take an X-ray, put it up there, go and look at the patient, go back and look at the X-ray. Now you can do this not only in cardiac surgery, but imagine doing it in cancer. You'll be able to know exactly where the margin is and whether you've excised the cancer totally by doing imaging at the time of the operating room. Robotics will be discussed, and of course, there are now ability to have pacemakers without leads. And also using, in fact, remote sensing, you can actually do echo ultrasound and actually being able to follow your cardiac rhythm in real time. In cancer, with the ability to sequence the genome, every cancer, as you know, is made of 1,000 different genetic mutations. But of the specific one mutation, you can target drugs. So what you can see on the left side is a series of targeted therapy. But importantly, the breakthrough that you all read about is immunotherapy. That is the ability to harness your immune system to fight your cancer. What cancers produce are signals to the immune system that make them weak. And now we know what those signals are, called checkpoints. By blocking the checkpoints, the immune system is wrapped up, and now you find cancer treating non-treatable melanoma, lymphoma, and many other areas. And of course, you all read about gene therapy, which has just been FDA approved, that is being able to genetically manipulate your immune system to fight cancer. Finally, liquid biopsy. You don't have to take a real biopsy. You can take a blood and begin to measure what's circulating in blood, DNA and others, to look at whether you have cancer, early cancer cells or not. All this is real time and it's happening right now. Aging. Imagine thinking about robotics, artificial intelligence, the Internet of Things, remote monitoring. This is just an amazing area by which technology, we know genes that can lead to long life, that technology between biology, technology, engineering can be brought to the home of elderly and being able to greatly enhance the quality of life, enable them to work effectively. So finally, the big issue, of course, is the ability to take data in and convert it into useful information. So in our field, we call it big data, as many others, and of course, artificial intelligence. Look at the list on the right corner. Huge amount of things, as you heard, biosensors, electronic health record, many other information you can collect. That huge data with data analytics can begin to provide you information and evidence of what to treat, how to treat a patient, and to make new ways of approaching treatment. On the left-hand side is artificial intelligence. Being able to turn that into machine learning, neural networks that can do a lot of things. So I have to say, I don't fully agree with the earlier speaker that it's about repetitive action. Artificial intelligence can read radiology, pathology. They can actually outdo the human ability, reducing human error, and I think this will actually greatly transform medicine. So what do I expect? I expect data and technology will greatly change the way we do care, engage patients to be sure. I agree with Jeffery on that point, and certainly healthcare operations, research, precision medicine, many others. So I'd like to just end by saying, what's the future of healthcare? The question is, where is care given? Where is care delivered? Who can deliver the care? And who is, in fact, making the diagnosis? Who is assisting clinical decision? And how to improve productivity? All those, you won't have time to see those words, can be actually in the future using big data and artificial intelligence. So this slide shows you that, in fact, as Jeffery said, patients can actually play a very big role. The patients, in terms of being able to, imagine do a selfie, retina selfie. Actually, there's a company that's doing that right now. So you can manage, look at whether your diabetic disease is under control or not, to look at, in fact, engaging yourself in decisions making and others. So I've shown you here that you can see on the right corner called Nora. Nora is an intelligent assistant that can help you do almost everything, making decisions, being purchasing, but also helping you engage your health. It's not the nudging thing he talked about. It's actually your assistance is part of you that can help you to move forward with a lot of decisions. So I would say the implication of all those is that we are at the edge. We can cure disease, if not greatly treat a whole series of disease. We have new knowledge and evidence applying to strong analytical power to better understand the patterns of health and disease. We understand the social factors that influence disease, a seamless continuum care, change the way care is delivered, and assist in personal and healthcare decisions. Now, what's the implication? I think this is where the issue is. First, patients have to own this. Trust is an important issue. Patient engagement. Second, do we have the right workforce? Very different types of workforce in terms of training. We need a lot of people who know how to use data and how to in fact, and we're very worried, as been said by an earlier speaker, does that replace physicians? Does it create burnout? Because I just came from a meeting electronic health record, and every doctor says I'm spending 50% more time doing electronic health record than speaking to a patient. And of course, regulation. What's the FDA regulatory framework? Cost. We're also worried about this driving up the cost. Will technology eventually drive down the cost? Because as we've seen in many other areas, reimbursement, access. Are we going to create greater and greater separation between those who have the money and those who do not have the means, and therefore many social implications? Workforce. We need a lot more systems engineering, data science, team science, behavioral scientists, social scientists, regulatory scientists, and communication. We're dealing in a very different world than doctors only, whether it's Marcus Welby or nurses. In fact, we need teams of people working in the transformation. My last I simply say, if you look down, even as soon as 12 years ago, I strongly believe we're going to see a very different type healthcare environment. The medical and technological breakthroughs and advances will provide us with an armamentarium of just amazing tools and approaches to transform health and medicine. And that health and healthcare will be better connected, more precise, more democratized, patients will own it, people-centered, with better outcomes. But the challenge is going to be, are we ready for it? Therefore, what is the pace of adoption of this new technology? How do you pay for the rising cost of care, and how do you actually prevent the inequity that may emerge from all this? So I would say certainly leveraging and incentivizing public-private investment in this area is very important. Where's US in this? Well, all you have to do is hear the news about repeal, repair, all this problem we face. We need to get beyond this political argument of coverage to get into really healthcare and to optimize it. Artificial intelligence. I say that China, many others are ahead of us. Lest we think we're the best healthcare system in the world with technology, we need to actually pull them all together for the patient to make it more affordable and more equitable. Thank you very much. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Zhou. One of the things I'm always reminded of in health is we all require sleep. And Dr. Zhou, I have to note, you've just come in from Japan for this presentation, so thank you very much and hope you get a little rest. In our final innovation conversation this afternoon, we're going to hear from Mr. George Fisher. George is the Senior Vice President and the Group President of Verizon Enterprise Solutions, and he's going to answer a really simple question. Is America cyber resilient? Why does this matter? Well, it matters for a lot of reasons. For example, in 2021, cybercrime will cost the world $6 trillion annually. That's double the cost of cybercrime in 2016. And each individual attack represents significant costs for organizations, whether they're small or large. And as the manufacturing industry increases its own reliance upon the Internet of Things, such as the cloud-enabled internet, big data, to improve productivity, it's simultaneously opening itself up to and making itself more vulnerable to cyber attacks. Currently, the manufacturing sector is the second most cyber attacked sector in our economy, right behind healthcare. And these vulnerabilities really affect the competitiveness and long-term productivity of the entire nation. So George, please welcome to the stage, and thank you for sharing your insights. Snuck up on me.
Yeah, I did. Thank you, Deborah. I will not give you Bitcoin back, but I'll give you some time back. Okay, first of all, my apologies. My partner in crime today, Steve Ashby, had to take a West Coast trip back. So we're going to attempt to do a Reader's Digest of this, because actually, besides trying to do a detailed plenum on cybersecurity and its impact on industry, it's basically a call to action. So we'll go pretty quickly. Yes, we will. Okay, there we go. So you know, I'm going to kind of click forward here for you here in the U.S. industry. So we've got a couple of issues that everyone in this room needs to be very aware of. It's around privacy, and as you well know, privacy means lots of things. It means you may have your personal data stolen, but most importantly, you read every day about your identity being stolen. Also, from a transactional point of view, privacy, if you don't trust privacy, you will not interact with each other, or you will not engage in commerce with us and others. So it's very, very critical. The other is, we talked a little bit about IoT all through the day. So for security today, security of IoT is not just a matter of privacy, it's becoming an issue of safety. So it might be one thing if it's a temperature probe in a room, but if it's a control valve on a pipeline or some sort of waste product that may be released into the environment, it becomes a much bigger issue. And as you know, there's different attacks that can occur. The other most important aspect is the threat of IP theft. Today, everything we heard today was about the creation of value around IP and work product. The fact is that these threats are organized in a way to steal and wreck, or in fact, sometimes vandalize the work product, or as you've heard from ransomware, steal it and then force you to pay ransom for it. As you can imagine, Game of Thrones and other interesting things that have happened just this year, starting way back Sony, when the original picture on North Korea was stolen. The other major thread that we need to be focused on is the human capital issue, particularly for security and technical professionals, but also for compliance and other areas around policy. There's an incredible shortage of those type resources, and we need to continue to invest. Lastly is the diversity of attack, and that's what I'm going to about close on. We have here for everyone, it's called the Data Breach Investigations Report, for short, the DBIR. It creates basically 9 categories of attacks, and then it's done by vertical. Now, the reason that's important, there's about 70 folks around the world and organizations that input into it. But one of the things that we see, and it's kind of anecdotal, but there's some board and management frustration and fatigue around security. So one of the things that this report does is it helps categorize and helps you prioritize how to approach fighting cyber warfare. So it's an important document. It's here. Please re-gift it to your CISO or anyone that is as interested. Okay. For the sake of time, I'm going to just briefly talk about Steve again. The issue with cyber attack is that, in fact, it is a national and a global issue, and the folks that are attacking us are very well prepared, highly intelligent, very organized, and extremely persistent. So the purpose of the events that we're going to show you and your participation in them is a national security issue, and it's a personal issue. So what we're asking is basically the involvement of the team to have some detailed input into these issues. So we're going to have 3 sessions, and we invite you or your proxies to attend in these sessions so that we can sit down and go through all of the issues that we talked about. Probably a lot of conversations around talent, organization, and other approaches to make sure that we do this correctly. The closure of this is we'll put these reports together, and we're going to have an opportunity to package the report and issue it for our entire council, but also be able to present it to the government and other interested authorities in a very organized way. So, as you can see, we have the first one coming up in February, where it's going to be held at Verizon's headquarters in Basking Ridge, New Jersey, in our conference center, and we'd very much like as many folks as can attend as possible. As you can see, we have 2 other sessions, which we will also report on. So, in closing, thank you for letting me come up and give you the Reader's Digest version of this. All I ask for the remaining people is if you please extend the invitation so that we can have good participation and cross-section of ideas and thoughts that we can package. So thank you very much.
Please welcome the President and CEO of the Council on Competitiveness, the Honorable Deborah L. Wynne-Smith.
After lunch of these vignettes has really been superb. So I'm going to be very, very fast. And first of all, thank you all for coming, staying with us for the day, and participating. I thought I would return to my favorite game of alliteration. So I've come up with a 10-point policy platform that kind of summarizes what we discussed today and the path forward. So the first, we're all about people with potential, with purpose and perception, who are prioritizing problems, producing progress and productivity, propelling prosperity, pleasure, and pride. So all of you join this party, be part of the promotion, participating in the year ahead and all the work of the council. And so thank you so much for your participation, your support. And please take the clarion call and promote it in all your activities, and look forward to working with you over the year. And of course, anything we can do at the council to help your agenda, we stand ready to do that. I want to thank the council staff. Those of you here, stand up. We're going to do a staff picture before we all take off, but I want to wish everybody safe travel home and a wonderful holiday, and thank you so much.